AI, though, is only as good as the information that it is provided. So for me,
and this is genuinely, I've heard this, like, if I can use AI, how many of these reps can I like get rid of?
Welcome to the Redefining Sales podcast and welcome to season 4. We are back and we have some amazing guests coming up for you. So I wanted to start out this season by talking about all things prospecting. It is absolutely the talk of the town right now with a slightly slower economy, higher interest rates, businesses making redundancies and cutbacks on their spending. It's really been the number one topic that I've been hearing about right now. So I have invited 2 guests along to have this conversation around all things prospecting. So I have gone to Lucy Lee, who is at PurplePatch, and she has a really strong background in sales enablement. She's been, for example, the APAC sales enablement manager for Go1. Prior to that, she's had individual contributor roles at the likes of HubSpot. So she really does know what she's talking about, and she's walked the talk. And what I like about Lucy is her just very real, very honest, very pragmatic and experienced approach that she brings to the table. So I've got Lucy, and with her, I've got her co-pilot, so founder and managing director, Danielle Dacunha-Howarth from PurplePatch. So Danielle started PurplePatch over 4 years ago now, having come from a really strong background. So Danielle, prior to that, was Senior Vice President at Go1 as well, around revenue operations and enablement. Before that, she was at Salesforce and was Director for APAC for Cloud Sales Enablement. So between the two of them, they have got bucket loads of experience. So in this conversation, we talk about when you hire a new sales professional, how do you make sure that onboarding experience is right and we really set them up for success. We talk about AI and technology and sales intelligence tools and what we can be doing around that at this point in time. We talk around prospecting and in the market, what do we need to be doing right now? So we really do cover a huge amount of ground in this conversation. So grab your pad, your pen, and get ready to jump into this conversation. Lucy, Danielle, welcome to the Redefining Sales podcast. So happy to have you both.
Thanks for having us.
Thank you so much. Yeah, thanks for having us. This is a lovely opportunity, Abby.
I think we can talk probably till the cows come home. I had to actually shut myself up before and press record because we were already chewing the fat. So I am super excited about this conversation. I think between the 3 of us, we'll be able to delve deep into the world of sales. So thank you for being here.
Of course.
I wanted to start out talking about prospecting. I don't know what you're seeing at PurplePatch, and I'm super interested to actually get your lens on what you're seeing. But what I'm seeing in most conversations I'm having is very much, how do I get my team prospecting? Either they're new to sales and they've not got the skills because they've not done it before, or hang on, it's been good times for a while. We've had a more, a better economy. And so we've not had to. And so people are almost having to dust off that skill and then obviously modernize that skill. And so there's a level of either I've not done it before or I've not done it in quite some time. So that's what I'm seeing around prospecting and having, really to work with teams around how do you develop that skill to win net new business. I'm curious, sort of 2-part question around what are you guys seeing at PurplePatch and how are you helping people around this prospecting conversation?
I think it's a really good question. I think there's two parts to it from my perspective, and it's kind of the coaching and the one-to-one things that we're seeing, and then the things that the business is seeing. I think kind of breaks down to those 2 pockets. I'll let DDH talk around the business things, but when I've been running kind of the coaching side of things, it's almost like they don't know where to start. They've been given 100 million different tools. One thing does another, but it doesn't talk to a different thing. Some have got honestly, I've run programs of work where people have been in the business for 2 years and haven't even got the outreach plugin turned on because they haven't been set up correctly from day one. So it's almost like tool overwhelmed. And then when they actually start reaching out, you've got 2 types of people and there is a middle ground. And it's like the person who spends hours prospecting and like really nailing down all the insights. And then you've got the other person who's just chucking everything into ChatGPT and hoping for the best. And I think from my perspective, where you're going to win in 24 is essentially personalization, but at scale. So we know that, I've said this stat a few times now, like if we're reaching out to C-suite people, we're twice as likely to book that meeting if you use an industry insight compared to when you're reaching out to a direct manager leading a team, you're better off using insights based on them personally to drive that meeting. So you've got to really understand who you're speaking to. I was literally reading a report this week, and it said, I've got it in front of me because when you spoke to us about this topic, I'm going to say this. It was 86% of business buyers say they're more likely to buy when their goals are understood, which I think then goes, let's take them a step back. And when we're running the enablement initially, concentrate on buyer personas and ideal customer profiles, because that will help drive the result from the individual, which I think then leads into what Danielle can talk over, is more around the business requirements and running those big B2B programs, which we do too.
I have like 10,000 questions. I'm going to come to Danielle first, but I've got like 10,000 questions from that I've now like written down that we need to unpack. So we will circle back to them. But Danielle, have you got a lens as well?
Yeah, it's really interesting because when you opened with that question, you said you see into kind of things. You're seeing we've got a little bit lazy, we've had leads coming into us and that's now dropped off. And we as the sales team have to now find that delta. And then, there's also the skill, right? And it's really interesting because I was in a conversation literally yesterday as we were drawing out a learning design for a program that I'm doing for a customer. And the CRO said to me, I've got some young people in my team who started during COVID, and because I'd watched some recordings of some pitches they'd been doing, and I had some really strong feedback for them. And, I was saying that there's some real problems around presenting virtually as well. Like there was some very, very poor examples of virtual presentations and, leading virtual calls. And that's when we got into the conversation of, these people started during COVID, so they've only ever known virtual. And I'm actually struggling to get them out the door and in front of people. And I think there's some really interesting basic sales, just call them steps, that we are now missing. That I think, it's not just about the outbound activity and getting them really good at the outbound activity. It's actually getting them very good at the activity once they get the people, qualifying really, really hard as well, because that is part of prospecting, right? A deal's not a deal until they agree that they want to continue the evaluation process of your product or your solution. So until they say that, you are still prospecting into that person, into that account. And so I see it as being twofold there. I think we have to accept there's a realization that, some people have grown up in a virtual world, and we have to start giving them more interpersonal skills and get them back out into the field. I think we have a tendency to just drive. This is really poor sales culture. This is something that I talk a lot about with sales leaders, is don't drive a bad sales culture, right? Bad sales culture to me is when we're doing really well, clap, 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 everybody drinks on a Friday. Oh, don't worry what the top salesperson's doing, and then as soon as the going gets tough, how many emails have you sent? How many phone calls have you? Like, that is bad sales culture, right? You should be driving that activity high or low, right? Yeah. And that I think we have to get a lot better at too, is what is your sales culture? Do you expect activity each month, 12 months of the year, right? Because if you have let people kind of behave like that, then they will. So that's a bit of a different perspective from Lucy's, and yeah, I think it's another good one to kind of talk about too.
Oh my gosh, we've got so many good topics there, because, Lucy's tapped on, actually some of the challenge has come through people's onboarding experience of, I didn't even know I had that tool in the setup. So we kind of need to talk about onboarding.
For sure.
We've then talked about tool overwhelm, which 100% we've got to talk about. We've then actually talked about, virtual presentations, what is best practice there. And as you said, so many sellers who started their selling career during COVID in their pajamas at home, and now we've got to go out in the real world and talk to real human beings and get dressed, and all the different factors that come with that. There's so much in what you said there around virtual presentations and going, back out into the world. And then you also talked about the activity and, driving the good culture, that always on activity, not just, oh crap, we're off our number, let's go now. So there's, I feel like I need to unpack all of those.
This is the problem when you interview two people as well. It's hard, right? Because we've got so many different angles, but this is great.
Can everyone just clear their diaries for the next 2 hours? That would be great.
We're in.
So hang on, let's start with the onboarding then. Like, what does setting a seller up for success look like then, in terms of, and almost the gotchas to look out for that you're seeing from what you were just talking about there, that's almost creating that bad onboarding, and therefore the seller's just not even set up for success from the get-go? So I guess that's the ground level.
Yeah, I think I think there's well, actually, me and Danny had a really good podcast with a guy earlier this week, and he said, and we all agreed that essentially you're putting too much on them too quickly. So we're not giving them enough space to actually be able to onboard before giving these some stupid ramp targets that feel like, I'm sure they're not, but picked out of thin air and increasing every H1, H2, H1 every time we go through. So not getting the space to actually like have that time to onboard properly. When they are onboarded properly, it depends who's onboarding them, right? Like, have they got an enablement function that is delivering something scalable and repeatable on a global front, or is it just Australia, whatever it may be? But does that look the same, and is it consistent? Because when you've got different leaders and even like really good reps running onboarding, sometimes you're not going to get that same process that's then driven home at all. You're going to get just a million different versions of things. So that's one of the things Danielle was amazing at, is like bringing us all in as a team when we work together and going, right, we need to, you are not all going to agree, by the way, but we are going to create something get scalable and repeatable here, so that when an AE onboards in the UK or an AE onboards in Australia, you're going to have the same experience. We're going to localize it when necessary, but you are going to walk in and have the same experience. And I think that's really important for anyone who's going to be set up for success.
Yeah,
agree.
I'd say coming from I went through the IBM graduate program, and that's how I started my career in sales. And it felt, when you first start and you're a graduate who thinks you know everything, it felt like it was massive, because it was this like 2-year graduate program, very formal IBM sales school and all that stuff. And you're like, oh my God. But then now I look back at that and go, that investment in us was massive, and how much they had built out that sales school program, shadowing and mentoring, secondment, spending time in the channel. It was so well thought out, and it really did set us up as a cohort for success. We had from day one clarity around who were our mentors, who were we shadowing, what was the sales school program we were going on. And I look back at it now in hindsight and be like, that actually was really well structured for success.
It's an amazing experience for you, and what that pays back to the company in terms of tenure. You know, that if you have a poor onboarding experience, the tenure of the salesperson will be between 12 to 18 months. If you have a great onboarding experience, it'll be 3+ years. So it's worth that investment. And, Lucy gave some great points there. I think the only ones that I would add on are the company's readiness for the people coming in to the business. I have seen very bad examples of, particularly when setting up very new functions. So, expanding your SDR function or bringing in a larger cohort at the beginning of a new fiscal year. The lack of readiness for that, the lack of, we haven't finished the territory carving. Look, no one's got that perfect yet. And so I'm not going to say that I have, but I think I've seen many cases where the rush to hire has actually really impacted the onboarding experience and their ability to hit those targets, right? So I think there's onboarding, making it, and we've got a finite amount of time with onboarding too, right? The thing I say about salespeople is they want to get to a point where they don't need us, right? Salespeople are incredibly autonomous. If they're a good salesperson, they want to get the monkey off their back straight away as soon as possible. And so they'll lean on the people that they need, in order to get to that point. Once they've got to that point, very, very hard to get them back and to get their attention back. So I would say, quite honestly, you've got this finite amount of time, which is usually about 12 weeks, where you absolutely have their full undivided attention. We have the right to take them out of the field and to spend time with them. And so the way I broke onboarding down is, what do I need to know? what do I want to know, and what would I like to know? So the first 4 weeks, what do I need to know in order to do my job? And you only focus on that. What do I want to know is the next step, right? I might now start to be engaging in conversations. I might now start to have some pipeline. And that, what would I like to know? That's when I'm in the deal and I'm kind of now starting to deal with situations that are coming to me instead of like preempting them. So I'm having to be a bit more reactive, and therefore I need on-demand, quick access. How do I find out how to do these things? And again, structure. I've played around over my career with many different ways of doing this. Get them on the phones as soon as possible. Get them on the phones in the first week. Like as soon as you get that out of the way, as soon as you get them really confident in the talk track, the 30-second commercial, as Lucy said, massive investment in who we sell to and the challenges. I think there is also this really, really bad thing that we do, and we start with product. Don't start with product. Start with the people and the challenges, right? Once they understand that, because if you put product first, then they'll start talking features and functionality, and then we'll wonder why they're talking features and functionality.
Yeah.
So there's just a few things. Yeah, just a few things. And yeah, I we always set ramp targets. They're always high. But I think those small things make such a big difference in onboarding. Yeah, that would be my kind of piece of advice, I suppose.
Lucy, you were going to add to that?
I said, when you said it's product, I said the problem is once you started that, it's really hard to undo. So I'm literally working with someone at the moment who is in an incredibly heavy product pushed business. And now, honestly, like it's taken 7 weeks to even start the conversation of value propositions and how to lead with that, rather than, well, it does this in the workflow and the automation is this. And people just don't care. But it's very hard to untrain that.
I think that's interesting, because I think that I feel the conversation around, are we having a value proposition conversation? Are we doing consultative selling? Whatever your sort of train of thought is on that. I feel as if that's been a known for a very, very, very long time of don't just lead with product, don't just lead with widgets and bits and bytes. However, when I look at I've got a technology bias to this answer, right? Because a lot of the clients we work with are in technology. They still, the onboarding, to your point, the enablement, the focus is still very much widgets, product. And so it's actually an interesting one, because we're saying that we're going to focus more on being customer-centric, buyer-centric, having that conversation and so on. But yet we're training and enabling still completely the opposite, mainly still for product, which I think is part of what is probably driving that behavior.
Yeah, I think it's and we deal with SaaS, high tech, and it's exactly the same. And that is always our advice: is pull back on the product. Honestly, I think it's an easy thing to train on. I genuinely think people pad out onboarding with product because they don't have solid value prop commercials. Like, I genuinely think it's more of a, what are we going to do with them? Oh, I know. We'll just get Jeff in from product. He does a great presentation, and then we'll get him to do a demo. And it's like, do they even know who they're talking to yet? And so you're right. I think there is some undoing there. But yeah, it's funny.
So then the second thing that Lucy talked about there was around tool overwhelm. I have a bit of a theory at the moment, and you can tell me whether you completely disagree and you're seeing completely different or whatever, but I feel as if a lot of businesses have a Ferrari in the garage, but they never drive it. And so I feel as if what I'm seeing is people might have invested in whatever it is, the CRM or the AI tool or the LinkedIn Navigator licenses or whatever it is, doesn't matter. There's not necessarily always the enablement of how do I use it. There's not embedding the habit to use it. And so what I'm seeing is, whilst there might be an investment in technology, people are using 5% of what it's actually capable of doing. And I can see, therefore, where that tool overwhelm's coming, because it's like, there's so many of them, I don't know how to use them. That's what I'm seeing. And it appears as if the gap is partially consolidation, but partially also enablement of how do you actually use these things. Yeah. What are you guys seeing, and how are you addressing the tool overwhelm that Lucy's coined? Tool overwhelm.
Yeah, Lucy, can I talk about the tools? So like whilst I'm enablement, I'm heavily revenue operations as well. So, having had a team of 24 people globally, from sales ops, customer ops, partner ops, right the way through to enablement. So the technology stack. So when I started PurplePatch, I was at Salesforce, and I used to get wheeled out in front of customers all the time to say, hey, Danielle, can you come and talk to our customers to tell them about how we enable them to use our CRM? And, and hats off to Salesforce, right? They really do use what they sell. Like it's incredible. And I used to see, like you've just pointed out, hundreds of thousands, if not millions of dollars, pounds being spent on technology, a Salesforce, the Mercedes of CRMs. And, you get this great team together, everybody's on board, they've evaluated it, they've got the programs team are going to do this rollout, everything's going to be amazing. They don't assign enough money towards training. So they introduce a tool, the training budget usually gets eaten up in the rollout because something cost a bit more than they thought. And then, they wonder why there is lack of adoption. They wonder why there is lack of usage. So actually what inspired me to start PurplePatch was I wanted to have a real focus on technology. I wanted to have a focus on simplifying tools, simplifying the tech stack, and actually having the tech stack work the way it should be, which is not to be a hindrance, not to be an admin tool, but actually to be a sales insights tool. The tech landscape, as we all know, has just grown phenomenally. There's been many acquisitions. There's been, there's tiny tools down here that do a really small element of something that you want it to do, and it has a place. And so the tech stack has just blown out massively. But the problem, what you just said, Abby, is the overlap in the tech stack is actually now quite incredible. So as an example, you mentioned Sales Navigator. Sales Navigator absolutely has a place in the world. But then you also need a Cognism or a Zoom Info or something, because Sales Navigator is never going to give you email addresses and telephone numbers. But you overlay the technology now, and actually they probably do 75% of the same thing. And then we keep adding to the tech stack, but what we're not creating is our point of view on how everything should be used and when to optimize its usage. And that's the problem. And then I think I'm going to kick over to you now, Lucy, because I think it's like the perfect time is to talk about, how do we then enable people to use it in a prescribed way of how to, again, optimize it and to make it part of your day-to-day. Because people come from different organizations with different tech stacks. Some tools they've used before. But even Salesforce, you could go into one business, it'll look completely different to another business that you walk into. There's no consistency. So, so we actually dove into this quite a lot, didn't we, Lucy? And we've done some great playbooks on this kind of stuff as well.
Yeah, that's what I was going to say. So I think the thing from any tech and tool thing is, can I just say this before we carry on with it?
Quick one, you might have heard me talking about our YouTube channel. I have put on my big girl pants, I've got uncomfortable, and we are going big and going hard with our YouTube channel. We are posting content around the future of sales, high performance sales, really highly practical and proven approaches that can help you drive growth. So check out in the show notes the link to our YouTube channel, and we would love your support to get behind us and subscribe.
If we talk about a playbook, it doesn't live in Confluence. That is where things go to die.
Oh my God, please do not put playbooks in Confluence. Don't put training in Confluence. Don't give anybody a license to Confluence unless they are in IT or they run projects. Thank you very much, everybody, for listening.
Oh, it's so
I feel like you just got that off your chest and it's been sitting there for so long.
Honestly.
Okay, you feel better now? You feel like we can keep talking about tools? Are we good?
Yeah, we can carry on now. That's good.
Sorry, we heard you. Nobody put a playbook in Confluence. Carrying on.
Please don't. It's not a playbook. If you do it in Confluence, it's not a playbook. The way that a playbook should work is essentially it should be built, and then it's a guide. It's a Bible of how to actually use that tool. One of the best things that we did, and of course this was spearheaded by Danielle with us once you ran our team, was we built the playbooks, but we also built a training program alongside that. So yes, here's your playbook. And it also helps everyone in their way that they learn. So here's the video to show you how to do it. Here's the image of where to click. And here's the talk track of what to do, depending on how you learn best. So you have the 3 learning modalities there. And then alongside that, it was compulsory. And they would attend 30 minutes every morning for like, every other day for 10 days to go through that playbook and do it. And it wasn't me going, this is when you press login. It was, right, guys, get into your tools. And that's where we started, because that's where we started going, oh my God, you haven't even got this plugged in properly. Like people were like, oh, I don't want to start at step 1. I've been here for 2 years. And you're like, that's okay. I just need you to actually help the guys that are new then. And then when we actually got on the call, they didn't have it themselves. So the playbook with the learning pathway, and then the embedment. So then we started building the metrics on like how much they're using it, what's the adoption, how much is that improving close ratios, win rates, whatever it may be, against the tools that we're using.
Yeah.
And I think, go on, sorry.
No, I was just going to say, and just to add on to that is, one thing that I did with the team was that I assigned each of the, and this doesn't have to be enablement managers, this could be sales managers, but you assign a subject matter expert to every single tool, right? So, Lucy looked after Cognism and LinkedIn Sales Navigator. Another person looked after Zoom Info. Another person looked after, like basic 101 CRM. So having a subject matter expert is less daunting, right? Because we can all be generalists across all of them, and we should be generalists. But by having somebody who is the SME, it's ownership, they can then be the conduit between you and the customer success manager of the solution provider, so that when new things are released, it can come straight to one person. They can update the playbook, they can run a quick training. And quite honestly, I think that was a needle mover as well. It was really about, okay, let's have some SMEs in the business. It's really nice for people to own those types of things as well. They can own it as an OKR. And then, you've got one person to go to, it's not just like, Lucy, can you help me with this? It's like, oh, listen, Chris is doing a really great job on that. I'll connect you with him. So I think that was another thing that we did on reflection that worked incredibly well.
Agreed.
And are there any unfair question, but I get this question all the time, so I feel it's only fair to pass it on.
Of course.
Is there any tools that you swear by? Everyone is always debating, do I go Dynamics or do I go Salesforce or do I go Zoom Info or, do I go for Gong or do I go for, Navigator or do I go for there's bloody thousands of them. I can't even get my tongue around them all. Is there any that you kind of feel like if push came to shove, there's sort of one or two that are your usual go-tos? And I appreciate every business is going to be different.
Lucy, I'll let you go first.
I think from a user perspective, there's 3 tools that I think 4 tools everyone should have. HubSpot, because it's so user-friendly. LinkedIn Sales Nav, because you now can do everything if the employee count is over 200 in that piece of kit. Like, it's just insane. But you still need that data tool, which I think, I know it's not the most cost-effective version, but for Australia, I found Cognism was more effective than Zoom Info. So that was why I would say those 3 were, and Gong. Oh my God, Gong. I love Gong. Like, everyone knows how much I love Gong. I've used other tools, competing tools, and they haven't got a mark on Gong. Like, this stuff that comes out of that tool. This is the reason I don't have as many filler words. It was the first thing. And as a rep, when I was selling directly, it's the reason I ramped fast, because I was onboarding half remote, half in, but it was pretty much remote. We were being kicked out the door. And I was like, my very vain self, how do I become the best very quickly? And it was Gone, because then I had everything I could possibly have. I could listen to the best. I didn't have to recreate the wheel. I could just listen to the best people and be like, oh, I'm going to use that. I remember hearing a guy called Kev Newen, and he's awesome, really cool rep. And he just used this really strong negative reverse in the middle of a demo. And I heard it and I was like, oh my God, that was amazing. And from there out, I just used it. So I think a tool like that is just worth its weight in gold as well.
Okay, so that's your 4 go-tos. Danielle, are you the same 4, or are you going to start a war here?
No. Yeah. So I am CRM agnostic. I always have been. I've worked with them. I've worked with them all. I think It depends. I'll come at it from a different angle, probably. Like, as a salesperson, I would completely agree with Lucy. I mean, at the end of the day, you could remove the brand names and say, I need something to do research. I need something to give me data. I need something to log my data. So it's, my all my different tools just act in a box. I think it does come down to, though, the CRM that you have, because naturally there are better integrations with some over others. Some have been natively built for Salesforce, some haven't. And with Lucy, I think HubSpot is an incredible competitor now. I think they have. It's interesting when we speak to end users prefer HubSpot. Sales managers and above prefer Salesforce, just because I think HubSpot is still really working on the analytics, and the reporting piece isn't quite as strong yet. And you're having to do a little bit more reliance on external analytical tools to kind of pull it together and create that. But yeah, look, I mean, I'm ex-LinkedIn as well. So Sales Navigator, I was part of the team that launched it into the market. So it has a deep place in my heart. But yeah, I would completely agree with Lucy. I think Gong is an incredible tool. I think it's always underutilized in every organization that has it. Although I did get a glimpse at the Gong future roadmap, and I think you'll be able to do a lot more in Gong that would probably actually mean you can get rid of a couple of other tools as well. So I would definitely have Gong, just because I think the future roadmap is there, really, really there.
So we've talked about lots of tools. Some of them have started already investing in some of their Gen AI capability or AI capability of varying degrees. And it seems to be the talk of the town. Like, I know, Lucy, you were referencing the Salesforce report that came out at the time of recording. I think it was last week. And I think the stat in that was something like 80% of sellers are now leveraging AI or something like that. It was really up there. The LinkedIn report was 75%. And I think the Salesforce report that's come out subsequently is something like 80%. What are you finding, I guess, as a build on our tools conversation, what are you finding the conversation is around AI and sales? And, what are you seeing there? How do you approach it?
I'll jump in first. Everybody wants to use AI. There's absolutely no doubt about it. Every single tool, as you just said, is coming out with some form of AI, or, and all of a sudden you'll log in one day and there'll be this button and it's got sparkles on it. And it says, use AI to rewrite this. And it's, it's very alluring, I think. It's definitely the talk of the town. AI, though, is only as good as the information that it is provided. So for me, it's the old CRM, garbage in, garbage out, right?
Yeah.
So if you are not logging your calls, if you are not logging your notes, if you are not doing any of that, it has naff all to work with. Absolutely. So what will you get? You will get a generic outreach, which just sounds a little bit fluffier than how you would write it yourself, in my opinion, right? So I think it's great. I've absolutely no doubt that in another 12 to 24 months, we might actually start to see the full power of these tools. But right now, I don't know. I'm just not seeing its worth in terms of outreach. I'll box it off in terms of outreach. AI in terms of automation, speeding things up, absolutely. Like, that's where, if in any organization, that's the conversation that I want to be having is, okay, forget AI for outreach just for now, because again, I think we need to work on the data and making sure that we're feeding it the right information to be able to personalize. But let's talk about automation, right? Let's talk about how these tools can actually speed things up and get rid of any and all of the admin tasks that we need. I think that's really where AI for me is playing a bigger piece, I think.
Yeah, I agree. And I think the report Lucy was referencing, I think it was something like 70% of the time, you were talking about this on LinkedIn the other day, Lucy, 70% of the time we're not actually selling, we're doing admin, we're doing, a bunch of other stuff. And so we're actually not selling. And so, like, to your point, Danielle, how do you reduce the level of automation? So how do you use automation to reduce all of your admin burden and actually spend more time doing what we should be doing, which is sort of selling? Did I butcher those stats, Lucy, or did I get them right?
No, I think you're bang on. I think it's right. Yeah, you're bang on there.
Yeah, absolutely. And, particularly in things like, in Zoom, in any of your, if you are doing virtual calls, yeah, the AI tools to be able to just like run a quick synopsis of what you talked about, pulls out imagine that. Like I mean, I still do, to be fair. I write all of my follow-up notes because I still use pen and paper. I'm old school, it's that right to recall. I like to take notes. And yeah, that takes me time. But now the fact that you can kind of click, it'll summarize your meeting. You can put that into a formal email. Here's all the things that we discussed. Here's the next steps that we agreed. Like that easily saves you 45 minutes. Easy. Yeah. So that's what I mean in terms of like using the tools to speed up that admin and all the boring stuff that you don't want to do. It's great. But don't stop taking notes, because that's your engagement piece, right? Don't get lazy.
And I think it's also the thing I'm seeing, and then Lucy, I'll come to you for your perspective, is I'm seeing, and I'll actually use myself as an example, just throw myself under the bus for a bit of fun. The mistakes I've made is when you almost take it a little bit too literally, or taking it as a given and not sanity check. So for example, I used Account IQ to profile an account, look at who the competitors were and so on. And I didn't delve deeper into the specific competitors for a particular division. I looked at Account IQ and I was like, that's amazing. I've got the competitors, I've got all the information. And that was correct, but it was looking at it holistically as a business, not at the particular department that I was speaking to. And that was totally my bad, schoolboy error. I know better. But I think it's also just going, okay, that's what it's giving me. Let me go and sanity check that. Let me go and actually do some of my own checks and balances. And the same with what you're saying with like the meeting notes. I was testing a couple different tools for meeting notes. I've tested like Firefly's AI, I've tested Otter, I've tested like a few different ones as well, and doing that summarization in that early piece. And some of them were hilarious. Like Abby exchanged pleasantries and talked about, and it's like, no one needs that in their recap. So I found that you can't just copy and paste. This is my very inarticulate way of saying you can't just copy and paste. You've got to sanity check, tweak, refine, edit before using any of what's spat out by AI.
Yeah, look, AI is great, but it's never going to be a human brain. Never. And, the robots won't take over. It's you're right. There are things that it will miss. It will speak in a way that you just don't. And that, I think, you can see through it. Like I can see through it when I get sent a message or an email that's been pushed through ChatGPT. You can tell now in the language. So yes, it'll get better with tone of voice and things like that, but it's never going to know the nuances that the human brain will. So yeah, I'm with you. Like use it, but triple check it.
Yeah. Lucy, any final additions on our AI conversation and our tools conversation? Anything else you feel like you need to get off your chest?
No, I think the businesses need to take the opinion that you both have just said, because I think I've had a couple of conversations now, and this is genuinely, I've heard this, like, if I can use AI, how many of these reps can I like get rid of? And that honestly, I was like, and I remember having the conversation with the tool, and their whole thing was it's not to replace. Like it's almost just like an extra member of the team. So I think people who are buying the tools for the businesses really need to understand why they're being used, and they're not just there to replace a headcount and save you an SDR or an AE budget that year. Yeah, that was kind of the biggest outlier for me. It's like I still think some people think it's just going to do a job for you, and it's actually just not. It's there, like you guys said, to help, not do.
I always say think of it as like your virtual assistant. Like think of it as like this is why Microsoft have done so well calling like Copilot, because it is like think of it as your Copilot.
Yeah, you will get efficiencies, not now, but again, 12, 24 months, you'll definitely get efficiencies and go, okay, a rep can handle 10 more accounts, or, they can handle 3 or 5 more opportunities. I do think we'll get there. And that's where you might see some efficiency in terms of headcount. And I suppose it's interesting, like some of the AI bots, the calling bots, like are quite fascinating. I've seen some well, I've had bots like ring me, and I've played around with them, which I think's super interesting to do. But there's some really great examples of, them being able to handle some very, very basic cold calling or, inbound inquiries, which I think is quite interesting. Again, you can tell now, you can tell the responses. It's like a millisecond delayed, so you can hear that it's thinking almost. but yeah, it's, again, we're not quite there yet, but I do think there will be some efficiencies for sure. But it's, everybody wants it now. That's not going to happen.
Yeah. So I've got to take us on to the next topic that you talked about. This is great. You guys talked about so many things at the start. We've just got a really good hit list to tackle. Danielle, you were talking about COVID, virtual presentations. I'm curious around, you talked about watching a video and seeing things that actually you were like, oh no, so I'm curious about some of your do's and don'ts, but I'm also curious around that generation that have come into sales during COVID from home, all virtual. How do we actually now sort of start to get those sellers out into the real world? Like if that's what you're seeing.
Yeah, definitely. So I think there's two things. I'll start with the how do we get them out of the office, like out of their office and into meeting rooms. Unfortunately now, because I think we're definitely more in a hybrid work state. Okay, even if your company says like we're bringing you back into the office, it's hybrid. Let's be honest. Yes, there are still some people that are working 100% remote, but if you work in hybrid and your customers work in hybrid, we're not going to have that nirvana state anymore where, perhaps, Abby, Lucy, we've had where we've managed to get all the stakeholders in a room all at once. So that is a challenge. That is a problem. But it shouldn't be the blocker. I think the blocker at the moment is in our heads. I think the blocker is, I really like just staying at home. Oh, I don't really like having to get on a bus or get in an Uber. So I think we've got to get out of our heads a little bit. I think we have to remember that, that meeting people, looking in the whites of their eyes builds rapport 10 times faster than what you could do even if you had 2 to 3 calls. I think the other problem we've got, Abby, is that a lot of companies have removed their T&E budget, and quite a substantial amount of the T&E budget, because they realize that they can save a lot of money. But again, I think there's an organizational standpoint to say, hey, we're putting budgets back. We encourage you to go out, to take people out for coffees, to take them to events, et cetera, et cetera. So I think the company has also got to put their money where their mouth is to encourage this behavior. And yeah, I think maybe applying and putting it in some targets as well and saying, okay, I want 50% of your meetings to be face-to-face and virtual. Right? I think
interesting.
To encourage that, because yes, until you if you haven't done many face-to-face meetings and you start to do them, you will soon see the benefits of meeting people face-to-face, no doubt. So,
and it's interesting. I even found I did start my sales career when it was very much face-to-face in London. Let's go for a beer. It was that. And I found after COVID, I really had to jumpstart myself. So I'd be like, hang on, I'm going to drive like an hour. Then I'm going to have a 45-minute coffee. Then I'm going to drive an hour back. That's going to be 2 hours. Plus, I'm going to have to shower. And I'm going to have to put on some makeup, which really feels like an effort right now. This is like a half-day extravaganza for a coffee. But it's interesting. You kind of almost have to, I found, kick yourself out of it to actually remember the value of, I've met you in person, I've eyeballed you, I've met you face to face, I can see your body language, I can just build that rapport and that relationship with you, and the value of that. So I definitely was guilty at first that I had to remind myself of that value.
Yeah, I completely agree. I think we can all relate to that. Oh gosh, like we've become more efficient. I think we get a lot more work done being at home, there's no doubt, but is it the wrong work? Like, are we busying ourselves with the wrong work? Because the right work as a salesperson is being in front of as many people as possible. So yeah, if you are feeling like that, if you're listening to this and you're feeling like that, I challenge you to just, switch that mindset. In terms of the virtual stuff, I am a real perfectionist. When COVID hit, Lucy will attest to this, but when COVID hit, I took that very seriously. Like I was like, right, what tools am I going to use to recreate a training environment, a meeting environment that simulates as close as possible to what I would do? So I invested in great audio technology. I picked really great virtual whiteboarding tools. I invested in a great camera. This background's shocking, by the way, compared to what I usually do. But I invested in having a really great background, it looking professional, good lighting, so that when I was presenting, I mean, how many times do we go to a presentation and people are like this? Yeah, I know exactly what you mean. And they're looking to the left or they're looking to the right. They're not even looking at the camera. So for me, there's a get your setup right at home. Like if you were going to operate from home, get your setup right? You have dual screens, you have a great camera. Also, though, invest in understanding the virtual technology that you are using. Again, like Google Meets is a great example. When you present on Google Meet, you can't see who you're presenting to, right? That's why I favor some other tools, because I can't see the reactions of people.
Yeah.
Being very aware of people's reactions, but also now you have to plan your interactions. Okay. When you're in a room, you can see someone turn, you can read that body language, you can act on a whim, you can write something down on a whiteboard. Virtually, you can't. And I like feedback. I like to think I'm quite a funny person, so I crack a few jokes. And, it's awful when you crack a joke and it's silence. It's like crickets. So you have to prepare for that, right? You have to get really, really comfortable with being uncomfortable, but you have to plan your interactions. So Abby, being the head of customer success, here's something that I think you would be really, really getting a lot of value out of. What do you think? Abby unmutes herself. Right. Lucy, the other day when we were in that meeting, you mentioned this and some statistics around that. I want to bring you into this conversation now to share that with the rest of the team. You have to plan the questions, the people that you're going to talk to, who you're going to call out, and when you want their interaction. And I see that we just talk at people, and it just falls so flat. And again, like work on your presentation skills. How do you engage people? Use your tonality, use your arms, use some interactive tools. So that's the kind of stuff that, people really, really need to work on if you are going to continue running pitches, presentations, discoveries, even discussing commercials, even demos. You've got to get really, really, really good at it. So there's some of my do's and don'ts.
There's some really, really, really good. And it's funny, some of them are back to basics, but it's not basic. I always talk about common sense and common practice. And, when you first start in sales, you learn about, okay, how do you present yourself and how do you turn up, and have you got a half-eaten Bic pen, or, what, all those things, so your shoes dirty. But you don't really learn about that in context like you've just done around going, have you got a good background? Have you got, do you look presentable? All those things. And I think sometimes those reminders you've just given, for some people it might be the first time, but for a lot of us it's a reminder. It's such a healthy reminder to be intentional. Like what you're talking about there is, how have you planned? How have you been intentional about the questions? How are you intentional about your background, intentional about your appearance? It's being intentional. I love that.
Yeah, it's like now when I say it, people will be going, gosh, that's such basic stuff. And it is basic stuff. But yeah, use these tools are amazing. Like you can on Zoom throw up a whiteboard, right? Start taking notes as they're talking, or get them to draw on it. Like it's interaction, it's different. And that's another thing. Stand out from the crowd. Don't turn up with your cap on. People just forget. They've just come back from a walk. They've got the cap on. They're a bit sweaty. Like you wouldn't turn up to a meeting like that. Vaping on calls. I've seen people vape on calls.
Yeah.
Like if you're a vapor, get that vapor out of the room, get it somewhere that it is unreachable, because you have a habit, right? Whether you like it or not, you have a habit. And that habit,
I've never seen that. Anyone who's watching on video has just seen me put my hands over my face, cringing, dying on the inside. That is a new one on me. You guys have given me a new one today. I have not seen someone vaping.
I had somebody vape in a training, in a room. They vaped in a training room in London not so long ago. Yeah.
Wow.
It's so remove it, put it away from you. So you just, that habit, that just reaching for it and taking a puff just doesn't exist, because it's a killer. So yeah, those are just some of the when I say virtual presentations, like you have to work on that. Is another skill. Skill.
I love that. So we're starting to run out of time, but we've done really well. We talked about onboarding, we talked about tools, we talked about virtual presentations, we talked a bit about prospecting, we talked about AI. I think where I'd love to sort of wrap it up is actually coming full circle a little bit around prospecting, but also just how are you helping clients through the current situation where a lot of clients are feeling like the economy's slowed down, things are a little bit harder, the leads aren't coming and flowing as easier, our team are finding it a little bit more challenging, they're getting a little bit more indecision, just that current sort of state of play in terms of the market. If you were going to kind of leave people with parting wisdom around, coming full circle on that prospecting and that outreach and that always on conversation that we kind of kick-started, what would be your advice to people to navigate this time?
Lucy, I'll go to you first. I've hogged the mic. Sorry.
No, not at all. I think take the time to settle in, let yourself onboard properly, and don't do what the rest of the team are doing, because I think there's a lot of bad habits amongst teams at the moment. So do what you intended to do when you got the job. Don't just fall into the pattern of doing what everyone else is doing. And yeah, that would be it really. Like, take the time you need, learn it, become an expert at that stuff, and keep going. Like repetition. That's the only way I think people get really good, is just repetition of those things over and over and over and over again. And I think the other thing I really don't think is done enough is actually just role play, like in an environment that's pretend. Because if you can have a conversation that's totally pretend, I promise you, when you have it in real life, it's much easier. So yeah, I think that would be my takeaways.
Danielle, anything you want to build on?
Yeah, just so all of Lucy's advice at an individual level, simplify, right? There's so many other things you can be doing to busy yourself, but at the end of the day, what do you get paid for? Focus on your own metrics, what you get paid to do. Go back to basics, personalization, head down, do the numbers. Like, honestly, the more, where energy flows, something grows, they say.
I like that.
Everybody knows that is a great saying, but yeah, like, remove all the distractions, focus on the needle movers that you know will result in you hitting your numbers. Personalization, there's a lot of crap out there. You've got to think about how you cut through. You've got to use really great stats, industry insights, the things that people care about. And yeah, I think for me, just from a business standpoint, business casing, like, nobody's spending a lot right now, and what they are spending is getting under incredible scrutiny. So great ROI and business calculators will help your team phenomenally. Yeah, so that's my advice.
That is an epic shout out. Now, we'll put all the links in the show notes for if people want to connect with either of you on LinkedIn. We'll put the link to PurplePatch. I know you've got a podcast as well that we'll put a link to. Any other shout outs of where we come find you, connect with you, stalk you, all of the above?
Just everywhere. I mean, we're on everything now. We're on TikTok. We're on Instagram. We're proper cool. Like, we're like up there in terms of modern enablers. Yeah, no, but definitely LinkedIn. Drop us an email. Drop us a text. Love to hear from you. Yeah, thanks so much for having us, Abby. It's been a great conversation.
We could keep going for ages, but thank you so much, both of you, for being on. As I said to everyone, also go check out Danielle and Lucy's podcast as well, and connect with PurplePatch and connect with Lucy and Danielle. And thank you guys so much. We covered actually quite a lot of ground in that amount of time, so that was impressive.
We did. Thanks so much, Abby.
I hope you're enjoying this conversation. If you have not done so already, please subscribe to the podcast so that you never miss an episode. We have just recorded some incredible conversations that are coming up, so make sure that you hit subscribe and you'll be the first to receive them.